So, you're looking to start playing Dungeons & Dragons. Let's get you started with my 6 tips for beginners. We'll cover the absolute basics and the lead up to finding a group and actually playing my favourite game of all time, Dungeons & Dragons. Tip number 1, do not be afraid to play your way. D&D has gone through wave after wave of new players, new generations, and new additions, bringing new ways to play. With more people playing it than ever, and ever more accessible tools for playing, there are more ways to play than ever before, and probably one that suits you out there. Loosely speaking, most D&D adventures sit on a spectrum. On one side we have the heavy story-driven roleplay games. These have a focus on players talking to one another, acting as and exploring the development of their character, more than exploring the mechanics of their class. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the dungeon crawling combat simulation style of D&D. This can feel more akin to a board game with heavy use of strategy and tactics, to not fall flat of the traps and monsters you come across. Now, in my experience, it's rare to find the two extremes. You're more likely going to fit somewhere in the middle. Even the more famous D&D podcasts or shows like Critical Role or High Rollers, which lean heavily into roleplay, still have interactive battles of strategy. Personally, I have played both, and as a DM I tend to lean towards story myself, but if roleplay makes you uncomfortable, then the dungeon crawling, gold gathering, monster slaying version might be for you, and vice versa. Okay, regardless of which way you want to play, you will need a character, and for that, we'll need a character sheet. So tip number 2 is to understand the basics of this without getting worried about all of the unnecessary details. I'll help you out with that though, so let's dive in and take a look at the basic layout of a character sheet. If you want me to go through the full character sheet with some tips and tricks, then let me know in the comments below and I can work on that in the future. Now, there are many types of character sheets, but in my experience the most common ones look like this. And for those of you working online for relevant portions, I'll also highlight areas on the popular character sheets from online tools like D&D Beyond. Without further ado, let's get into the key areas of the character sheet to understand. The first thing to look out for are your key attribute stats. These might look familiar to stats in other games, they roughly outline what you're good at. Strength is how strong you are, dexterity is how quick you are, constitution is how hard you are, intelligence is book smarts, wisdom is street smarts, and charisma is your skill with communication. This is obviously a huge simplification, but we're keeping things breezy here. There will be 2 numbers associated with each of these stats. The actual stat and the score. The score is the important one to know. This will typically have a plus or minus next to it, unless it's a 0. If you try to lift a giant boulder, you'll need to make a strength test, and the plus number is what you add to your roll, or minus if you're a weaker character. The rest of this we can cover at length another time. The next thing to look out for are these 2 boxes. The one titled Saving Throws are the scores you add when the Game Master asks you to make a saving throw. It is usually only used in danger, so don't worry, just be aware it exists, and your GM or DM will tell you when to use it. Underneath that are the skills. These are your more specific abilities. Again, a plus or minus should appear next to them to let you know what to add or subtract from any test your GM or DM asks you to make. Just be aware of your higher scoring skills, and to best help your group, try to do those checks if they come up where you can. These 3 boxes at the top are important for combat, armor class, initiative, and speed. I'll cover these in the combat section later, but just be aware that this is where they are. You should have your combat spells and weapons listed in the attacks and spellcasting section as well. Again, we'll reference these later, but this is where that goes. Usually on a separate sheet, you will find your spells for any of you spellcasters out there. These may be a little complicated to understand. Let me know if you want a full guide on spells too. It took me a while to fully understand them myself. But on a basic level, your spells will be listed here in order of power. Cantrips are like mini spells. They aren't very potent or powerful, but you can cast them pretty much whenever. All other spells after that will cost a spell slot to cast. Think of them like magical bullets. When you shoot a spell, that bullet is gone. Eventually you'll run out of bullets and you'll need to reload. There are different sizes of bullets for different types of guns, and there you have your spell casting. Okay, I really don't want to pile too much on, so I'm stopping here on the character sheets, but I could go so much further, so let me know if you want the rest of it. Moving on as swiftly as I can into tip number 3, following the story. A game of D&D, be that an adventure, a single game known as a one-shot, or even a full campaign, is typically a bit like a video game. There is probably a main story that you can follow along that the Game Master or Dungeon Master has prepared. Sometimes it's as obvious as go through the dungeon you're in, kill the things in front of you, collect the treasure. Other times it's less obvious and there won't be an obvious way to keep going. At times like those, it's best to remember one key rule of thumb that you can keep in the back of your mind as you play. You are playing a different person, normally, with their own ambition, their own hobbies, their own ways of interacting with others. Just think, what would your character do right now? While you're following your gut, if the DM wants to rein you in, they'll offer hints, clues, and nods towards a goal, which will eventually move your group towards the story in general, and it'll all feel nice and organic and fun. Now, once you're pushing along the story, and even during downtime, you will likely have to complete challenges. These could be puzzles that the DM puts in front of you, a collapsed bridge you need to cross, or an elven door that only opens when you answer a riddle, etc. Or it could be a skill check. A skill check will usually be requested by the DM or GM to see if your character can complete the action they wish to take. If you're looking for clues in a room, they may ask for an investigation check. If you want to leap across that chasm, they may ask for an athletics check. To complete a check, roll a d20, a 20-sided dice, the one we use the most in D&D, then add the requested skills plus or minus score that we discussed before to the result of the dice. The total is your attempt. If it was high enough, your DM will let you know that you succeeded. If it wasn't high enough, then your character failed. There is also an optional rule which players know as rolling a natural 20. What that effectively means is rolling 20 on your 20-sided dice, the perfect score. This nat 20 is often ruled as an instant success or even a critical success, and can be a pretty hype moment for everyone at the table as you succeed with some level of grandeur. Tip number 4, know about your combat basics. You are stood before your first beastie, be it a bandit, a wild animal, or some inexplicable monster. But how do you even start combat? Well, remember those 3 boxes we found at the top of the character sheet? AC, initiative, and speed? Well, we'll need to grab your initiative score for now, as players all roll for initiative. This is a skill check to see who reacts the quickest to combat, and determines the order in which everyone takes their turn, as D&D combat is turn-based. So, you've rolled your d20 and added your initiative number to it, but you are low down the list and the beastie is going to attack you first. The GM or DM will roll for the monster, and will then likely ask you a question along the lines of, does a 15 hit? What they mean by that is that they rolled a skill check total of 15 for their attack. This is where one of your other boxes comes in, your AC or armor class. If your AC is higher than the number the monster rolled, then you successfully block or dodge the attack. In this example, let's say your AC is 12. That is lower than 15, so the monster does hit. The DM tells you that you take 4 damage, so you subtract 4 from your current health pool. Okay, now it's your turn. Let's grab that last box, speed, and put it to use. A D&D battle map is usually broken up into squares, each one representing 5 feet. So your speed of, let's say, 30 feet means you can move 6 squares. 30 feet of movement divided by 5 feet for each square means you have 6 squares of movement. So, you run up to the monster who had hit you from a safe distance. But what else can you do in your turn? Well, a player's turn is broken up into 3 parts. You can do each part in any order that you want, but you can usually only do each part once. In any given turn, you can move up to a total of your speed, which we already did in the example. You can use an action, and you can use a bonus action. So we did our speed, our movement, so now let's do a bonus action. Let's say we're playing Baragorn, a sword-wielding ranger with a bit of imposter syndrome. As a ranger, we have the spell Hunter's Mark, which costs a bonus action to cast and makes our weapons hit a bit harder, so we spend our bonus action doing that. Now, one additional rule I will throw out for you spellcasters is that you can only cast 1 spell per round typically. So, because we used our bonus action for a spell, we will have to use our action for something else. But that's fine, because Baragorn is carrying a longsword, so let's use our action to make an attack. This should be listed on the attacks and spells portion of your character sheet, as we mentioned before, and attacks have 2 sets of numbers to them, a score to hit and a score for damage. When you declare your attack, you will roll a d20 and add the score next to the attack that says to hit. For Baragorn, that is a +3. Let's say Baragorn rolls a 13 on his dice, so we add +3 to that to make it 16. The DM informs us that 16 is higher than the monster's armor class, so we do hit. And we get to roll for damage. For damage, we roll the next set of numbers. For Baragorn's normal longsword, we roll 1d8, the 8-sided dice, and add 1 to the final result. We rolled a 4, and we add 1. for a total of 5 damage. With our movement, bonus action and action used, that is the end of our turn. Your fellow players will then take their turns one by one in the order of initiative you rolled at the start of combat, and when everyone has had a go, you start from the top of the list again. This rages on until the beast or the entire party dies, and that is combat. Be sure to work with your friends. Many monsters out there are super strong but not all that smart. You need to outwit them as well as just hit them hard in many cases. So, now you know the basics, you'll want to find a group. This is potentially the hardest part of playing D&D, so for tip number 5, let me suggest how you can make this easier. There are plenty of ways to find groups online. You have online forums for D&D platforms. They're usually a great place to start with lots of people playing. Personally, I've used Roll20 and D&D Beyond, but there are loads of others out there. So if you already use some D&D tools, check in with those communities for some beginner games. There are also some really awesome tools on the horizon too that should be great for jumping into games when you have nowhere else to play. The one that seems to have the most promise at the moment is called Demiplane. Links to that and the others below. However, in my opinion, the better option if possible is to find a like-minded group through Discord servers. Especially servers that you're already a part of and that you vibe with. Maybe ask if anyone there is interested in starting a D&D session, and maybe hope someone there has played before who's happy to try being a DM, or pick up the title of Dungeon Master yourself. If you're looking to play in person, with the growing popularity of D&D, plenty of local game stores are now starting groups, or at least have connections. So if there's a board game store near you, especially if it offers D&D books and minis, ask them there, and they might be able to help out. Special note to DMs that want to take the leap. First things first, it is daunting and terrifying. I did it myself a couple of years ago, jumping from basically not playing to DMing straight away, but it can be crazy rewarding. I would say if you have that giddy feeling alongside the terror, that creative or strategic butterfly when you're planning and setting up a D&D session, then you're going to be great. Everything else will come with time and practice. And for you DMs, finding a group is exceptionally easy. Finding the group that fits perfectly can take time, but using the same forums or communities I listed above, you will eventually find them. Just keep at it. As someone with 2 perfect groups, I can attest that it is so worth it. D&D is my weekly boost. It is one of the few key factors that helps keep me going strong, and I hope you can find it too. A final tip for number 6, and as corny as this is, have fun. Focus on being your character, develop the perfect combat strategies, but most importantly, have fun doing it. More so than anything else I cover, D&D is for fun. Enjoy yourself, or enjoy not being yourself, just enjoy. And that concludes our beginner's guide to Dungeons & Dragons. I hope that helps you dive in and enjoy the magic. If you found the guide helpful, please do drop us a like, comment down below on any other D&D guides you want to see, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. There are even some similar videos on screen you can check out. I've been Gamesplay Greg, and I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.